Thank you very much for attending this afternoon. What I'm about to tell you, what I'm about to show you, is a very compressed version of what was originally a 4-hour presentation that the Institute for the Future gave in San Francisco about 3 months ago. This was the 10-year forecast presentation, and there was actually a group of about 6 of us who got up and talked about it. This time it's just me, just 30 minutes. Don't worry, I won't push it to 4 hours, I promise. The Institute for the Future is a 44-year-old organization. It's a nonprofit organization based in Palo Alto, California, that provides forecasting services to organizations, governments and companies, other groups, not to tell them what will happen. This isn't about predictions. This isn't about saying in April of 2018 this will happen. It's about understanding implications. It's about looking at the different drivers, the sort of hidden signals, the subtle messages that are out there that help to explain why change is happening and what kinds of changes we should expect in the coming years. For the last 30 years, the Institute has created a 10-year forecast every year. And that 10-year forecast was designed not to say, again, not to make predictions, but to describe particular drivers, particular signals that Institute researchers had uncovered and explored over the course of the preceding year. The idea is that an organization can take the 10-year forecast and, building with its own strategic insight, its own industry knowledge, will have a better understanding of what kinds of strategic choices to make over the course of the coming years. Many people think about foresight, forecasting, futures work as being similar to a wind tunnel in design, basically a chamber to test designs. In this case, it's to test strategies. But we also, as futurists, as forecasters, we also provide a service that's similar to an immune system, in that we help an organization, the body of an organization, get a sense, a taste of the kinds of challenges that may be out there to be able to build the internal capabilities, the antibodies, to allow them to meet those challenges head on when and if they do arise. So this is the 10-year forecast that we presented just a couple of months ago. To my knowledge, this is the first public discussion of the 10-year forecast we've had for this year. And the underlying theme that runs throughout this, and there are actually a few underlying themes. The first is, of course, sustainability. You can't understand the future without understanding the drivers around sustainability. The second is this interesting combination of forces that we have come to believe represent a very important set of ideas that will help organizations think through the kinds of strategic choices to make better, longer-term choices. And these 3 ideas are happiness, resilience, and legacy. Happiness, I think everyone knows what happiness is. It's this sense of well-being. It's the ability, it's camaraderie. When you're thinking in terms of organizations in the future, it's thinking in terms of what is the well-being, how well are you meeting the needs of your stakeholders. Resilience is the capacity of an organization, of an organism, to withstand sudden shocks, to rebuild itself when necessary, and to thrive when possible. And legacy is what we leave for the future. Legacy is what we create now that has implications down the road. And so those 3 ideas are woven throughout the 10-year forecast, through all the materials that, if you saw the full 4-hour version, you would see popping up time and again. This is the map that was created as the 10-year forecast map of the future. What you'll see along the top, and I'll explore in more detail in a moment, are the 5 key issues. These are the ones these are the benchmark issues. We're calling this a benchmark forecast because this isn't one that goes into little detail about particular narrow subjects, but instead is talking about what big drivers are shaping the future. In this case, carbon, there we go. Carbon, water, global power, in this case a particular kind of power, adaptive power, cities, and identity. So those are the five key issues. What you see, they are arrayed against a set of 4 scenarios looking at different ways that these 5 issues might manifest. Now, unfortunately, we don't have time today to talk about those 4 scenarios, but let me just say about them that we have explored the way that these kinds of issues play out in a world of growth, in a world of constraint or limitations, a world of collapse, and a world of transformation. So what we have here is it's a big story about gaps between supply and demand, between resources and needs, between expectations and reality. The big question is, how do we fill these gaps? So we're going to start by looking at, in our time here, start by looking at the gaps in the carbon economy. The first gap is the gap between energy supply and demand. A lot of things contribute to this gap: declining oil reserves, growing population, and the economic growth of the global south, that is, growing consumption in emerging countries. So how big is this gap? One way to answer that question is to ask what it would take to fill it if we were to use alternative technologies. Now, a researcher from SRI, Stanford Research Institute, named Ripu Malhotra, has given us some pretty scary numbers about what it would take for a 50-year gap. In order to meet our current and projected energy needs over the next 50 years using renewable energy, we'd need a combination of 2 or 3 of the following. Hydroelectric power, we would have to, around the world, build 1 dam every 4 months, or every 3 months, rather, for the next 50 years. If we decided to use nuclear power, we would have to build 1 nuclear plant per week for the next 50 years. Wind turbines, 1,200 per week for the next 50 years. Solar rooftops, 250,000 per day for the next 50 years. Solar power plants, 150 plants per year for 50 years. Now, we need to be careful here. First of all, we'll be using a combination of all of these, not just a few. And over the next 50 years, we will see measurable and even sometimes radical improvements in all of these technologies, except probably hydro. And those improvements will certainly increase our capacity to generate energy as they move to market. And efficiency. Efficiency will also be critical to how this scenario plays out, and in sometimes surprising ways. The planet as a whole uses about 16 terawatts. That means all of us, everything that we do, adds up to a global energy footprint of about 16 terawatts. Now, this allows us to keep about 1 billion people living very well, another 2 billion or so living reasonably well, and the bottom 3 billion living in poverty. Getting everybody in the world to that living very well standard is a pretty good goal, but doing so even as the global population swells to 10 billion or so people by the middle of this century, that would require about 50 terawatts of power. And that's clearly not an option.